Hi guys, I hope you are well. I am going to actually, hey, Mr. Valentino, I might be doing this a little bit. I deal with chronic back pain, and I have for a really, really long time. And it's just like acting up so much these days. What's up, Vaughn? Hey, Joey. Kahiri. Sorry, girl. My shirt, the letters. Hey, Les. Megan. Yes, I did. I did get that, Vaughn. Thank you so much. Soul Lounge Music, what's up? All right, you guys, we are so glad to have you. We're going to be chatting about Memorial, which is the AMERIE'S Book Club December selection, the last one of the year. It was also, Good Morning America. We're going to pretend that's the AMERIE'S Book Club sticker, okay? But also, Good Morning America chose Bryan Washington's book for their book club. So, cool. What's up, Brand, baby? People have been like, hey, are you gonna do verses? I don't know if I'm gonna do a verses. You know what? I love that there's so many people have such great music, and that's the thing. It's just a lot of fun. But yeah, we'll see. But, yes. Thank you. Makeup. Still wearing a lot of, AJ Crimson, you guys, brown skin. He does a great job of not making sure that the makeup is not, ashy. It's like golden tones, olive tones. I have olive tones, so I need that. Red tones, right in the middle. It's great. Also Makeup Forever. That's one of the ones I've been using for a long time. Cheeks. This is Outlaw. I mix, it's Taj Mahal by NARS and also Outlaw. So I'm just giving you guys a chance to come on into the room before we have Bryan in. Now, just as always, if you guys submitted questions on ameriesbookclub.com, thank you for that. I do have those here with me, but also you can feel free. Yes, AJ Crimson. That's right. AJ Crimson, someone just asked. He has fantastic foundations for women of all shades, and definitely women of color, brown skin without getting that ashy gray cast, if you know what I mean, or having something too red when your skin's more gold, you know. But yes, feel free to ask questions here in the chat. I will be peeping that. Stay tuned, Melissa. I'm not going to tell you what the book is about now. Thank you, Vaughn, for pinning that. I'm going to pin that comment. Memorial by Bryan Washington. Oh, wait, hold on, Vaughn. Can you write that one more time? Because Bryan's name is spelled with a Y. Yes. So he's going to be joining us from the Riverhead account. So get your questions ready. I did not read that yet. Rude Boy, Loves and Fenty, but I did see it on the shelves and I was going to flip through and I didn't have time to, but I saw it and it looked gorgeous on the shelves. All right, guys. Sending request. I feel like I am. Thank you, Rich, for that. I feel like I'm like, like the opening act, like I'm getting everybody ready, like telling jokes and whatnot. The foundation of youth. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. New music. I am working on new music. I'm not always working on new music, but I'm working on music a lot. And I've got a couple that I think are definitely like major keepers for the album, upcoming project. Humble Dennis Philly Holmes. I gave my daughter your name. I appreciate that. And I'm humbled. And yeah, I just hope that I can live up to that. Leah, what's up, T? I hope you guys are doing okay in this. I know it looks like it's backwards. It's not, guys. It's just the IG selfie camera. Oh, Riverhead is unable to join. Let me try again. Sometimes this happens. You're the go, always a vibe. Thank you. Curious. I'm glad you love that song too. Thank you. Because I love it. It's still a 10-10 project. Wish forecast was longer. I know, but that's the thing about those short snippets, right? You always love the short snippets because you always wish it were longer. Like I feel like there's a couple Jay-Z records that I wish were longer. There he
I think
is.
it's working now. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Brian. Hold on. I'm going to turn you up. I have sensitive ears. I can hear like everything. So I always have the volume to really low. Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I'm
Wow,
Betty.
yeah.
So you guys, Bryan Washington is in the room. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out to chat with us about your fantastic novel. We want to get all into it. And there's a lot of food. I'll let you tell everybody what it's about, but I'm letting everybody know you're going to be hungry when you read this, because it's like food and the descriptions and the smell, and like every single page. I was getting so hungry reading it.
Thank you so much for taking the time with it, and thank you for like being such an advocate for books and for literary fiction, and especially literary fiction from folks of color. Like it just means like a good deal. But the role of food was definitely something that was really important to me, just trying to figure out the ways that like a meal could show what a relationship is or what a relationship could be, and doing that while also doing it from a place of love for each of the characters, right? Like showing the ways in which their love can change over the course of meals that they share, or meals that they don't share, or meals that change over time. So food definitely wasn't something that I knew was going to be like as big of a role in the book as it ultimately became. But as I wrote more drafts and as I worked on my editor with it, it became something that made like an emotional sense. And that's when I felt like it was more on the right track.
No, it's funny because meeting you, your energy is like really like chill, but also really sweet. Like you have a really sweet energy. And I saw a couple of videos when I was like online. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting was that I saw was it the New Yorker that had you came out to your family over bread pudding?
Oh yeah, yeah, the bread pudding thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was so amazing. And also I was like, yeah, it's just more of that whole thing with food as a bridge. Even though, well, we'll get to that because I want to ask you some of those kind of like do's and don'ts. We're not going all red wedding here with it, but when you break bread, that's supposed to mean something, or accepting food from someone, or um, well, I guess you can't say withholding food from someone, but accepting food from someone, having that hospitality, uh, and not accepting food. One of the things I thought was really interesting about the book too is that you read a lot about the demise of a relationship, but you don't really read a lot about relationships that kind of quietly fizzle. And I wanted to talk to you about that. Like, what made you want to explore that kind of? I say demise, but with a caveat because someone else had a question regarding that. But yeah, what made you want to just explore that kind of relationship or ending?
Yeah, I think that for the exact reason you said, like not seeing too much of that and really wanting to read a book where that was the case, you know? I mean, I think that there's a way in like a lot of television that I've seen, a lot of movies that I've seen, a lot of books that I've read where like the relationships are illustrated or depicted in such a way where it seems like every moment is like a capital M moment, right? Like everything is like an event. And I wanted to read a book in which that wasn't necessarily the case because it feels like in life that isn't necessarily the case the overwhelming majority of the time. And it also feels as if though there's so much that you can learn about characters, that you can learn about folks in your life in those quiet moments, especially thinking of how those quiet moments are ultimately the accumulation of them. That is the relationship, right? Like those periods in between, like the big epiphany or like the big realization or the momentous thing that occurs. So, really trying to figure out what a story or a love story between two folks could look like that was, I've been calling it like a lowercase love story, like here and there, depending on what I'm talking to. But I actually do believe like this idea of like what is a story that is made up of many different silent moments going to look like? Because on the whole, it that ultimately becomes like a really big moment, right? Like the accumulation of all these tiny things. So really wanting to read something that was like that was a big drive for trying to write it.
Have a lot to do with the way that you chose to tell the story as far as like the structure, because it seems like there's almost like a whole bunch of vignettes. You know what I mean? Like everything's connected, but it's just like snapshot, 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 snapshot. It's kind of was the structure. But I also wanted to know too if it was like, is that your preferred way of writing? Because you have your short story collection a lot, and was it something to do with that, or was it just only this lowercase love story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, actually. I mean, I think I'm someone who doesn't have the longest attention span. So usually, like, regardless of what I'm writing, whether it's like a novel or a novella, or whether it's a short story, it's going to be broken up into little excerpty, vignette modes. And that's just because I think that's how long I'm able to pay attention for any given tangent on the page. I think that also comes from me not coming to reading at as early as like a lot of folks in my cohort, as a lot of my peers, but I was someone who watched a lot of film, someone who watched a lot of television. So thinking of moments as scenes and trying to figure out how and what each of those scenes could look like and
Mm-hmm.
what doesn't need to go into those scenes is something that I take from, project to project. But also I feel like whether it's with Lot, like the story collection, or whether with Memorial, the novel, when I'm working on something, what usually drives me is the question or the questions that those pieces of fiction are revolving around. And sometimes they're questions that I can answer fairly quickly, or not answer, but like I spend enough time with them that they're no longer as interesting to me anymore. And that might be a short story, like something that's 1,500 words, something that's like 2,000 words. But other times there could be a question, like for Memorial, the question of like, what is home for someone? And can home change over the course of time? Or a question like, what if someone can have many different homes at the same time? Those are questions that it feels like there really aren't clear-cut answers for, or at least they're questions that you can come back to again and again and again. So that was enough for me to feel like I could spend, 3, 4 years working on them without it losing interest for me or without me losing interest in it.
Is that how long it took to write Memorial or to write Lot? About four
Well,
years?
for Memorial, honestly, it took about that long for both books. Yeah, I mean, for Memorial specifically, it's like 3.5, like 4 years on, and then there was like a year where I was really like intently working on it. Like in the other years prior, like that those 3 years before that, it was just like work on it, and then I do other things, and I go back to working on it, and then I do other things.
So during your writing process, because you're talking about the attention span and also just like the vignettes and seeing it as a movie, because they say sometimes some writers see things very cinematically. When it's almost like you're just writing down what you see, and other people are like, I don't see anything. It's just like I hear it, but
Mm,
is it very cinematic for you? And when you're writing this, is it playing out in your mind like a movie?
it's exactly that. I mean, and it's funny like trying to like articulate it and talk through it. It's not doesn't sound as like professorial or as like literary. It's like, oh, it's just like a movie. Like in my head, I'm doing the shit or whatever. But it feels very much like that. And like the actual writing and the editing of it is trying to figure out, okay, if this is like a cinematic thing,
Mhm.
right, or a cinematic expanse, which of the scenes within it feel as if though they're necessary, and like which of the scenes feel as if though like I'm constantly learning something about the characters and their relationships and this world that they're building for one another, like what among the scenes is telling me something about the love that they have for one another, or how that love can change over time, or how it can be broken over
Mhm.
time. So really trying to figure out what would go into this narrative that like I'm seeing and then ultimately put it on the page is a lot of my process, and it takes a while sometimes, but by the end of it it's feels as if like it just moved from moment to moment, and a expanse is developing, or like a portrait is developing, because I'm really interested in being illustrative of scenes instead of like being prescriptive, like instead of saying like, oh, like this is the way that someone has to be, or people can only be this way, or like this person is this way because of XYZ, so much as allowing characters and people to have room to like grow and also to fuck up, and perhaps also to come back from those mistakes and like find each other.
Did you know all of these things going in? Like, was some of this explored and discovered as you wrote, or did you have like an outline for this? Because it's like I imagine it's kind of difficult to have a total outline because again, one. I have two questions. One, if you were outlining this, or if you were discovering a lot of this and changing things as you were writing, and two, how did you choose these moments? Because if you're kind of like, it can almost be day in the life of, if you're not like really being very picky about how you're choosing the scenes. It's like, because you have such snapshots, each snapshot becomes so important because you're telling
Mm.
this is important to focus on this. How did you go about that process?
Those are really great questions. So I think for the first one, like I knew, so it's a love story between, or it's a kind of love story between two dudes. One, his name is Ben or Benson, the other's name is Mike. And I knew that it would be a love story between those two folks. And I knew that we'd spend a little bit of time in Ben's vantage point, a little bit of time in Mike's vantage point. And I knew that I wanted to have the reader spend nearly equal time. So they almost, like if you were to combine them, they almost spend as much time together with the reader, and that was really important to me. And I also knew that ultimately like food would have a pretty big role in it, and that Mike's mom would have a pretty big role in the narrative, but I didn't know how it would end. And I think that a lot of what drove me to like actually finish the project, like actually get to the end of it, was wanting to see like how this love story between these folks and this family that they've created would resolve, because like I just didn't know. And I
Wow.
didn't know until I got to the end of it. And once I got to the end of it, it made a sort of sense. And I was really lucky to have an editor who helped me make it even more sense than like what I felt it already made. But once I reached the end of it, everything else sort of clicked into place. And I think that's what really leads into like the answer, like your second question, right? Like once I had the ending, or once we arrived at the ending, we knew where we started and we knew where we would ultimately end up. So the editing process was making sure that everything in between that made a logical sense, and everything in between that also made an emotional sense to both me and to the characters and the love they had for one another, and also the family that they ultimately developed. So in that way, it became sort of like a math problem, which is like not very interesting or sexy to me generally. But like when I'm thinking of structure, and when I'm thinking of like, okay, like what does this story like actually look like? Everything seems as if though it has to have like a reason for being there. Like for each scene, like what am I learning about this character? What am I learning about the world that they inhabit? What am I learning about how they view the world? And if it's like a scene where they're not learning anything, or the reader isn't gleaming anything, or the prop or like the plot isn't moving forward, then I take it out, because it feels like it's just there for the sake of being there, and like there are already so many other things that you could be doing and spending time with a book that is not intended on like what sense it's trying to make. So really trying to be intent and really trying to be smart about what goes into the worlds of each of those characters is something that's really important to me when it comes down to choosing like what scenes go where and what ultimately makes it into the book.
Thinking of character, like, some people believe that a character can just stay the same, or they're just showing them coming up against against external forces, and other people feel like characters definitely must have an arc in which they are changing and they come out transformed at the end, or become even more what they were. Do you subscribe to that? And is that kind of was that your approach for writing Benson and Mike?
I think that I definitely subscribe to the gist of that, I mean, I think that a change has to take place over the course of the story, but what that change looks like can be any number of things, even if it's only just the passage of time, right? Like one day turns into another day, then you've changed, even if only because you've become a little bit older. It doesn't necessarily, for me, need to be a bank robbery change or like a life shifting epiphany change. It could simply be something as, I don't know, as quiet as noticing something on a street or a road or in another person that a character hadn't noticed before. But for Ben and for Mike, in a lot of ways, it felt as if though for Ben, it was ultimately an arc of someone who learned to advocate for themselves and someone who learned to externalize like what they were actually feeling. And that part of that is in the structure of the book, because we get two parts with Ben, and as we initially get him, the moments are very sparse and the sentences are very piecey. Some of the chapters or the moment or sections that he has, some of them are just like a line or two, some of them are 3 or 4 lines. And as the book progresses, he starts saying more and we spend more time with him on the page, and he speaks more, just like by just actually verbalizes what he wants and what he's feeling. So that felt like a change for him. Whereas for Mike, it felt as if though his arc is ultimately someone who learns how to listen to other people and learns how to intuit like what they actually want or what they actually need instead of what he wants them to want or what he thinks that they need, which is like a massive shift for someone to make, right? Like to have like emotional intelligence or like to develop emotional intelligence for the
Mm-hmm.
folks around them. It feels like a really important thing. It felt like a really important thing. And for that, he, you know, his section, it gets quieter and the moments get smaller and he starts speaking less and it's more excerpted and PC. So really trying to figure out what each of those characters actually wanted and like how they could go about
Mm-hmm.
finding the thing that they wanted was really important to me when it came to figuring out how to structure the book.
I was about to say something about Mike specifically, but then I also wanted to ask you about the ending because someone had a question about that. But before that, Ryan, Kelly, I've got you. She's like, Memorial is about what? Please give us
That's a
the.
good
I was like,
question.
and I was sitting
It's just like, what the fuck is this book
Kelly.
about?
I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, let's stop. Memorial is about from the.
Yeah, so it's a love story between a black dude named Ben and a Japanese American dude named Mike. They're just trying to figure out how to be okay with one another as people, and also how to be okay as people in the world. And Mike's mom Mitsuko helps them along in that. But the base of it, if someone were just stopping me off the street and say, okay, like what the fuck are you writing about? Like why should I buy Memorial? It's a story about people trying to figure out how just to be okay as a person, which is like a really expansive thing. And the characters spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that looks like. But ultimately, it's a journey for all of them.
Yes, there we go. Kev is laughing.
I hope that was a hope that was like a sufficient answer. It's still probably people be like, I
He's
don't
like,
know what you're talking about.
yeah. Yes, and also I think this is an important part too. Let me just say, so basically, they're going through this issue. Next thing you know, Benson is like, well, Mike is like, hey, something's going on with my dad. I've got to go to Japan. This is not a spoiler. Don't worry, Brian. I'm not going to spoil it, but I've got to go to Japan. Something's going on with my dad. Oh, also, my mom is going to be here. You've never met her, but you guys are going to live together for a hot second. And they're living together for weeks. And Benson's like, what? So that's like a big part of it. I would say that's kind of like the inciting incident, right? So that's yes. And you go through, and Mitsuko plays a big part of everything as well. That's Mike's mom, you guys. And that's where a lot of it, it's not the only cooking that really happens. Well, it's the only cooking that happens, but it's not the only mention of food, but that's where a
Mm.
lot of, and they kind of get to know each other through cooking. She expresses herself through cooking. It's like all of her energy. And until she begins to express herself, I found that she was ex- express herself verbally. She was expressing herself through cooking. Like some of her cooking almost seemed so just not aggressive, but you could feel her feelings about being left. Not that she was left with Benson, I didn't feel, but I felt like just being left by her son. And she seemed kind of mad. Mad mama in the kitchen. That's kind of the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, no, that's super fair. I mean, I feel like for me, like we were talking about like things that like I knew offhand, like Mitsuko, who is, you know, Mike's mom, who's an elderly Japanese woman who, like, as soon as the book starts, we find her in a position where she's coming from Japan to visit her son in Houston that she has not seen for however long, and she's really excited to do that. And the first thing that the son tells her is, oh, I'm actually going to Japan while you're coming here to look for my father that you divorced, and also you're going to be staying with my maybe partner for an indeterminate period of time. Goodbye, right? And I feel like if I were in that situation, I would react a certain kind of way. Perhaps other people act a certain kind of way. And it says something about Mitsuko that the first thing that she does is cook a meal for her and Benson to create like a place of comfort and a place of stability, right? And I think that's really emblematic of like the role that she finds herself taking and the importance I think that she intuits like really early on of how can she can impact these young men over the course of the narrative. Because in a book that's like a lot of about communication, right? Like how people relate to one another and how they talk to one another, whether it's through texting, whether it's through cooking, whether it's through trying to build relationships with one another, whether it's through sex, whether it's through the withholding of sex. Mitsuko is the one character who is actually honest about what she wants and what she thinks other people want and how they can go about getting it. And that honesty can be really unsettling, I think, for characters and for people who hadn't experienced that, or if they're used to hearing things through like three different layers of deception or like three different layers of a lack of exaggeration, you know? And in a lot of ways, because we don't, it's a love story between Mike and Ben, but we really don't spend too much time in the story with Mike and Ben in the same place at the same time. And yet Itsuko is there for all of it, both the past, the present, and going into the future. So in many ways, it is her story, and in many ways, she is driving the course of the story, and she knows that. And it felt really important to me, and I knew pretty early on that her character had to be a massive presence and a consistent presence, but also a presence that was allowed to change and one that was allowed to be dynamic and one that was able to impart her will on each of these characters.
Well, I laughed out loud when, not knowing her yet, you know, so of course there's assumptions that Benson's there in the car, and then he's like, he turns on the radio and it's like Meek Mill, and he's like, push something at somebody else. It's like all this stuff. I could feel it was so visceral, the awkwardness in the car, especially because he doesn't know if she's going to be like the super traditional, like conservative Asian lady who's just like, oh, what's going on with this music, or if
Mm-hmm.
it's completely different. And she took me by surprise too, because she was every time I had an expectation, she would find a way to flip it. And I thought that was really cool. Someone wanted to know if Word Stringer wanted to know, Bryan, are parts of this story from your own experiences?
No, they actually aren't. But at the same time, it was really important to me to write the sort of story that had the sort of relationships that I'd been in, the sort of relationships that like my friends had been in that I just hadn't seen on the page or that I hadn't seen on the text or in a book. So really wanting to write the sort of thing that I would want to read, that I would, you know, just want to sit with and actually spend time with when there were so many other things that you could be doing was probably the biggest inspiration behind it, right? Like I had a handful of friends in mind when I was writing, and I also had myself in mind while I was writing, and really trying to figure out what is the sort of story featuring folks of color, featuring Black folks, featuring Asian and Asian American folks, featuring Latinx folks, featuring queer folks that have built a community with one another and built a family with one another. Like what sort of story featuring those communities would I myself enjoy? And really
Mm-hmm.
writing toward that was the probably the biggest inspiration or like the biggest driver behind it.
I love that Benson works with kids. He works at the daycare center, and that was a surprise. I was like, when I saw that, I was like, I've only seen this one time in a book, and I think that I've read every book on the planet, but I've seen it in Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, right? This one of Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, and that's the only time. And I was like, daycare center. I was like, there has to be a reason why he chose this, because I love that he's with the kids. But what was your what why did lead to that choice? I have words today for some reason. Maybe I should, but I'm like tripping my words today. So why the daycare center for
It's
his
okay. I'm
job?
almost always tripping over my words. For me, it was that was probably there are very few things that are like actually true to my life in this book, but that is one thing that's pretty close. Like for like years and years, I worked at like an aftercare center, and I'd never read a book where someone worked at a daycare or like an aftercare center. Honestly, like in most of American literary fiction, people don't work. Like people don't work, they don't eat, and they don't have sex. People just don't do those things. So it felt like interesting. Like, could I have a book in which this is something that a main character did? So that was one reason. But another reason was that I wanted to show a space where Benson, who's a character who's not especially outgoing or is not especially forward about what he wants or isn't particularly like emotionally honest at the beginning of the book, like have a space in which we see that he can be, right? Like that's someone that he can ultimately become, and how he relates with his coworkers and how he relates with the kids that he's working with.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a really important thing to like show like, okay, this is something that could happen, or this is a possibility that could occur. And the book can actually be the journey toward it, or a journey away from it, or like an ebb and flow toward and away from it. But actually showing that it was a possibility or something that could be there felt as if it was something that needed to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too. Am I pronouncing her name? Shamina? Jimena?
Jimena.
Jimena. What were you trying to say, or what was your goal with regarding like marriage and relationships? Because I felt like we're getting all these pieces, right? And again, there aren't like a gazillion characters, so everyone is important. And I was just trying to figure out, well, what is he saying about relationships with this character? Hopeful, yes. Try again. That's kind of like, that's what I was getting.
Yeah, I feel like for me, like one of the biggest things about the book for me was trying not to be prescriptive, right? Like trying not to be someone who was writing a narrative in which I was saying like this is the only way that like a relationship is, or this is the only way that a person can be. So having a myriad of relationships, whether it's Jimena and her partner, whether it's Mike and Ben, whether it's Mike and Tan, whether it's Ben and Omar, whether it's Mitsuko and her past partner Eiju, or whether it's Ben's parents, like showing these are many different ways that people can be, and these are many different ways that relationships can be, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work, but the through line between all of them is that each of the characters is constantly trying and continuing to try and continuing to find different ways to seek what they ultimately want, and sometimes their wants change over the course of the relationship. So Jimena is like a character for whom like her wants changed as she transitioned from one relationship to another. And while she may not have been like a main character, or she may not have like had a massive role in the relationship between like Mike and Ben and how that changed or how it didn't change, it was still important to me to write a book in which each character's concerns and each character's wants and desires were like valid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't want just because a character was not the protagonist for them to just pop in and then pop out, or to have a narrative in which they weren't being taken seriously,
Mm-hmm.
or where they were just like filler, where they were just there for the sake of being there, you know? So really trying to write a story in which each character was the main character of their own particular story within this very particular world that I was trying to put in the book.
I like that. I like that. I also felt like one of the things that I got, well, it's not that I don't like Mike. It's just that I just found him so passive aggressive. Oh, and not and in a way, because unlike Benson, who just like, I'm not gonna say anything, I kind of just like, I just roll with life. I just roll with the relationship. I'm just rolling, and I'm not going to really exert any will on anything at first, right? In the beginning, how we meet him. But Mike felt like someone who kind of is like, the ball is always in his court, but he's kind of like passive aggressively moves through things. So instead of wanting to explore other people and saying that, he just kind of does. And then even with the way he deals with his family, and especially with his mother, when his mother comes to visit, I felt like he placed Benson and his mother in this position, but in a way that made it so he could kind of like relinquish control really quickly, and kind of like, oh, just deal with it, and then he could just like leave and not kind of have to bring them together. And do you know what I mean? Was that on purpose?
Yeah, I do. This is really interesting. I mean, that's what and one thing that I mean. You know, you write a book, or you write a project, or you create something, and you have the questions that you think are going to appear when it's like actually out in the world, and you're talking to folks about it. And this was like just one that like I didn't foresee, because like I talked to some folks and they absolutely cannot stand like they think he's just like a bullshitter. Like they can, it's just like his being on the page and his spending time with Ben is like the worst thing that could have ever happened to Ben. And then I talked to other folks and Ben is just deeply passive aggressive. Like he's like a parasite that's on the mic, like stopping
Oh,
him from
what?
ultimately becoming who he ultimately, you know, it's so like it's that dichotomy is like really interesting to me, but it actually really plays into something that was really important to me to move toward, like writing a story in which neither character was or could be perceived as being like definitively right or being as definitively wrong, you know, so much as just putting people on the page. And in the same way that there are folks in our lives or folks in our periphery that like we just don't like we think they're
No,
passive aggressive, we think they're full of shit, like perhaps, you know, we think that they're never gonna,
that's how you know you have real character, people. You know, if you're drawing,
yeah,
you characters, they become real people because different people like them for different reasons. Different people see different things in them, right? If you have a
yeah,
character that either loves or despises, it's most likely a flat character, or indeed a character, not a fully developed person, you know, on the page.
yeah,
Um, Mike was dealing with abandonment issues. He was always on the defense. Yeah. Yes, he was. And as we can see when they go through, they when Mike is dealing with his dad and his father, and then the little that Benson is dealing with his father, they both have these issues that they carry from their family, and then they internalize it. And I feel like they kind of repeat certain things themselves. Someone wanted to know Peter Parker. That's his real name. At least that's the name that he gave me. Peter Parker says it's described that Benson and Mike might just be okay in the end. Having finished the book, are Benson and Mike okay at the end? And what does okay even mean? Thanks in advance.
yeah. So that's a really great question. And I think that what was important to me, like, was leaving the reader in a position and in a place so that they could determine what okay ultimately looked like. You know, like it was less important to me to show whether they stay together in the end or whether they ultimately decide that this relationship isn't going to be the relationship that ends all relationships for them, so
Mm,
much as showing the arc of their relationship and also their respective personal arcs that allowed them to change. And Ben changes over the course of the book because he has a clear idea of what he wants and also the fact that he could probably get it. And Mike changes over the book because he discovers that what he wanted at the beginning of the book is not ultimately what he really wants, right? And it was changing the context that he's living in, changing the place that he's living in that ultimately allowed him to find that. And that is one way of being okay. But I didn't want to write a story in which you reach the end and it was a explainer or a primer on like this is the way to be okay. Like if you do all of these things, if you go to
mm.
all of these places, if you have all of these relationships or your relationship changes in these ways, then you will
You
be like an okay
not
person.
lie. Tell us what to do. Give us all the answers. That's what this is for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's you know, that's like that's sort of the gamble that you say, like to have like, do you have to? And that was a question that was really important to me. Like, do you have to give all of the answers at the end of the book? Like, I don't think that you do. Like that, then you know, the book as it is, like it doesn't. But the question that's on the back end of that is which answers or which questions are the most important in this relationship, which are the most important in the story of will Ben end up in a place where he could be okay regardless of what happens? Or will Mike end up in a place where he could be okay regardless of what happens? I think the answer to that is yes. And in that sense, like they are okay, right? Regardless of which way they ultimately turn, they will be okay either way. And that felt like a
Mm-hmm.
more true ending and a more true conclusion to me than saying like this, you know, they're going to be together forever or they're never going to speak to each other again after, you know, 4 days from the ending of the book.
I mean, they're carrying a lot of baggage. You know, they're carrying a lot of
Yeah.
emotional families, namely their fathers. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about too, was what were you exploring regarding fatherhood? And especially because, you know, Benson's dad is black and Mike's dad is Japanese. How did that influence what you were working to explore in both of those things? If it influenced it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in one sense, like having these two fathers and two father figures who weren't great was illustrative of the fact that men can be pretty shitty, or like generally men are pretty shitty, like regardless of where they're coming from or who they are. And it was also important to me to have like a story in which is I think that there's a certain kind of like coming out narrative or a certain kind of like queer story where the parents are either just like angel guardian parents where like you could never say a thing to them about their kids, where they're just, you know, perfect, like they would never take issue with their children's queerness or their relationships. And you have the other side of that where you have the parents that are absolutely from hell, like they're just like the worst and they have no redeeming qualities and they absolutely abhor who their kids are, who they stand for, who they ultimately could become. And it's fine to have those sorts of parents and those sorts of archetypes in your story, but I feel like in life, like as it's actually lived, you're somewhere in between the overwhelming majority of the time. And sometimes where you are, who a person is, that can change on a day-to-day basis. Like someone could be more one way at one point by way of their context or their situation. They could be more one way at another point, and they ultimately end up somewhere in the middle. So it was really important to me to have fathers in the story, of fathers and sons that had the capacity to change over the course of the story, right? Like they are better intuited to what their sons want and what they need and who they ultimately are. And then they have the choice to either meet their sons where they're at or have their sons meet them where they're at or find some sort of reconciliation in the middle of all that. And giving every character that choice, whether it's a father, whether it's a son, whether it's a mother, whether it's a friend, was something that was deeply important to me because I feel like there are a lot of texts where I read that those characters don't have that choice, and particularly if they're characters from like marginalized backgrounds because they're folks of color, because they're queer, because they are another minority or a minority within that minority. They're just sort of there and they're not given any flexibility or autonomy or the ability to change their mind or to make their own decisions. So giving each character that, and particularly characters that like at first glance might be thought of as only having one role or only able to do a certain thing or be a certain way was really important to me.
It's one thing too I wanted to know. Um, well, a few times I was wondering, I was waiting for Benson's dad to just pop him upside the head, because that's another way that you kind of subverted expectations. Was that they, I was like, I don't know, this is different. I was like, I know it's there. I was like, but I don't know any black child that talks to their parent like this and is not going to expect to get popped in the head. I don't really know with Japanese parents, but I know Asian parents being half Korean. I'm like, that just would not go down. So that's why his mother was so surprising to me too. But she's also American, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people tend to think that they kind of tend to see groups as being all like a big monolith. You know what I mean? Like Asian parents are all going to be like this. I'm guilty of that too. I'll still see an Asian girl with a tattoo and think that her mother broke down in tears. Like, oh my goodness, what happened when she saw that? You know, and it's not necessarily the case every time because you have parents who are second generation, etc. And so you really played a lot with that. Did you knowingly do that?
Yeah, it was really important to me to do that. I mean, I think that a lot of that stems from living in Houston and growing up in Houston, where you have a lot of different folks from a myriad of backgrounds, from cultures, from ethnicities, from financial groups or financial status, from religions, and so on. And everyone is subverting whatever archetype that they might be placed in or whatever expectation that they might be placed in some way. And I feel like growing up, seeing that and sort of being within that pocket, it really affects like how you view the possibilities of the world and also the possibilities of people. So I feel like it's important to me from any character that I'm writing about, like making them an entire person that is capable of reacting any number of ways. I feel like that's something that's really important to me, but especially in a narrative that spends so much time in a city like Houston and to some extent a city like Osaka. It felt important to me to show that people can be any number of ways and they can change over the course of time and that can mean something. So giving each character the capacity to surprise the reader and also to surprise the folks around them, and in some cases to surprise themselves was something that was really important.
Also, and side note, I do not advocate popping anybody upside the head. I will just say that I don't believe in spanking. I don't know if people get spanked, but I believe in just like explaining and being there, helping kids through big feelings. So that's what I will say through that. These are grown kids, but I'm just saying. Also, I wanted to ask you, so back to the character arcs and what was how characters are changing from the beginning to the end. What would you say? This is for both Mike and Benson. That each want and need. Because you know how they're
Mm,
necessary, right?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think that, well, for one thing, I think a lot of the book was trying to figure out the answer to that, and I feel like once I finished it, I had a better sense of what they wanted and what they needed, and actually editing it over the course of, however many years was me trying to get a finer and finer sense of like those wants and needs and whether they actually get those things. I feel like for Mike, he wants stability and he wants a family, but he just needs to chill out a little bit. I feel like for Ben, he's someone who wants those same things. I feel like that's something that unifies him and Mike, but he ultimately needs to figure out how to vocalize his wants and his needs. And much of their respective arcs over the course of the book is them trying to get closer to those things and trying to figure out exactly how to get them and how to get the versions of them that are best for them specifically because they can look quite different from person to person.
Someone said the live is lagging. I know for you, I'm still hearing you, but it was like now it seems like we're back on again. Brian, is this your Wi-Fi? Get your Wi-Fi together, Brian.
Oh, it could be.
Is it better, guys? Are we good? Also, someone said Teddy Riley Wi-Fi. Oh my gosh, Brian, did you watch the was it who was it, guys? Teddy Riley and Babyface?
I watched a bit of it. It was too much for me, but I watched a bit of it.
Teddy's Wi-Fi was too much. Teddy is awesome. He's awesome. We worked together and I had the pleasure of working with him and his energy is so great. But I was like, Teddy, come on, what's going on? I was like, y'all doing too much
I could be in the same boat.
studios to do the verses and stuff like that instead of just like just being in the studio, I mean, and playing the music. And that's the beginning of when people started doing all these productions. I was like, y'all doing too much and the Wi-Fi can't keep up. Anyway, also some of you guys were talking about growing up and being a 90s kids and I believe you're a 90s baby as well, Brian. And getting spankings and all that kind of stuff. And those spankings is like, everyone's going to say the thing. I'm like, no hating the kids. But someone did mention that it got pretty bad. And I'm sorry
Mm.
that you, that, and I'm hopefully you're okay from that now. It's kind of I kind of, and when we're having these conversations, you like talking about Teddy Riley's Wi-Fi. It's like, but I'm also acknowledging bad, a bad thing in the past, acknowledging it, but it's hard also because Brian's Wi-Fi is like doing all kinds of things. He's frozen on the screen. You guys can probably see him. Can y'all see him? Can we hear you, Brian?
Well, I can hear you and I can see you, so I
You guys,
wonder.
this might not even be Brian's fault. It actually might literally be my Wi-Fi, but mine is working fine. Apparently up here, it's down here.
Ah,
No, it's just messing with you. I got to mess with you. I do have a question too from Vaughn James. Before I forget, he said, I enjoyed this book so much. It resonated with me particularly as it brought back memories of living in Japan, touched on fragile father-son dynamics, and sons' relationships with their single mothers. It spoke to finding one's truth and a piece of life for oneself while navigating and reconciling with familial obligation. It asked of us, how much of ourselves are we obligated to give to the people occupying space in our lives? This is a question I'm still grappling with. Did you find an answer to that question for yourself after writing this book, or is it something you've always known?
oh,
That's
that's
deep.
such a great question. Yeah, that's such a great question. Like, holy
Yeah.
shit. I think that, again, a lot of writing the book was trying to play with that question. And I think that that's part of the reason that the book doesn't have as many like hard or definitive answers at the end of it because these are questions and these are ideas like what do you owe your family, right? Like what do you owe your parents? What do your parents owe you? What happens if you decide that the things that you want, the things that your parents want, or the things that your family wants for you, and the things that you want, or the things that a partner wants for you, and the things that you want aren't aligning with one another? Like, do you decide to meet them in the middle? Do you meet them where they're at, or do you just go after the thing that you want? I think that there really aren't clear-cut answers for that. In a lot of ways, it feels like it would be dishonest to posit like, okay, like this is the right way to approach that situation, or this is the right way to be, or this is like the right way not to be. And just circling around that question, I think, is something that's important to me in this book, but also as I move from like project to project, because there are many different ways to answer those questions, but the answer to those questions can also change over
Hmm.
time. So for me, the important thing is putting the question out there and having more questions develop from that question and allowing that to exist in conversation with other folks that are asking those questions without giving like hard and clear cut or like definitive answers, because everyone's answers are going to be different.
You just, and it's funny because it's even in Americans grow up feeling like it's very individualistic, right? So it's like, this is my life, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, my mom is Korean, so she could never get around and still can never, just doesn't accept that concept much. I mean, she gets it, but she still is like, no. She's just like, when you're a child, it doesn't matter how old you are, what, it just doesn't matter where you are in life. If your parents say something, you do it, you obey, you
Mm.
honor your parents. It's extremely disrespectful. The whole like, this is my life and I've got to live it. Like, that's like, no, what are you're dishonoring me, you're disrespecting me. Do you think nothing of me? Like, that's the thing. So I think it has a lot to do with like culture as well. And of course, another thing that you just said, you mentioned in other projects too. So, are you able to share with us what you're working on now? What's coming next? I feel a little
Yeah.
kind of asking too quickly because it's like, I mean, all this love, critically acclaimed on all the best of lists for 2020, and then I'm asking you, so what if we work on next?
Yeah, I'm like, this shit has been out for like less than 2 months. But at the same time, I mean, I'm working on another long project that I'm still trying to figure out what it looks like and where it's ultimately going to go. But it is something that is going. Like, I did peek like a sneak at like the chat, and someone asked, like, are you writing during the pandemic? I have been writing like here and there, but I also feel like the pandemic in a lot of ways and being in quarantine in a lot of ways has forced like me and also like a lot of other folks in my cohort that are writing to reevaluate like what they think of as being productive and what actually is productive and like how productivity can change from person to person. So really being generous with myself and being generous with like ourselves as we try and figure out like, okay, like what is good enough for me like right now, and is good enough changes, is that also okay for me, and having to figure out like what, how you can be okay with this change in rhythm and this change of routine and this change of productivity.
How?
So writing, working on another project, but also working on the script, because for the television series, so Memorial is going to be a television series. It was picked up by A24 and the Rudin production folks, and I'm working on adapting it with both of those teams. So really working on the scripts for that and trying to put them in a position so that it'll just be something that we all, me, like the A24 team, the Rudin folks, want to watch. It's something that we'll really enjoy. And everyone's been super enthusiastic, and everyone has just been really great to work with, and the energy has been really lovely. So we're really working toward making that like the best version of it that it can be.
Congratulations, that's
Oh,
amazing. I was just about
yeah,
to ask,
it's really lovely.
how have you been during this time, the pandemic? We've had so many things happening this year. Um, yeah, like, how have you been?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny question, like, because I feel like like, I'll start, like, events, and, like, people will be like, how have you been? How have you been? And it's, like, people just, like, okay, like, to get past it, or, like, we'll actually talk about how we've been, and that'll, like, change the whole energy and, like, the mood of, like, the thing. But I feel like for my situation, like, I'm in relatively good health, right? Like, the folks around me are in relatively good health. Like, we have stable housing, like, we have consistent food, and, our employment situations are okay for the time being, and that feels like a lot right now. So really, I feel like the challenge has been trying to figure out how to be generous with ourselves and one another, trying to figure out like, okay, like how can we find pleasure in this time in ways that like are safe and in ways that are actually pleasurable to us. And also trying to figure out like how can we help the folks in our communities, right? What ways can we support one another, even if the ways that support takes place or that support materializes, like changes over the course of month to month as the situation changes. So really trying to, I don't know, just be flexible and forgiving with
Mhm.
myself and with ourselves and the folks around me has been really important lately.
Have you been able to read a lot? Some people say they've been able to read a lot, and some people are like they just haven't been able to do much reading, and that's not, but that hasn't been where they've been able to find solace. But have you been able to read a lot? And if so,
Yeah,
do you?
that's yeah. Yeah, I think that like this has kind of been like a pretty shitty year, but in a lot of ways, like it's been a great year for publishing and particularly for hearing from folks from marginalized communities, from folks of
Yeah,
color that are just like publishing like these really
yeah,
great books. I mean, I really enjoyed Luster by Raven Leilani. I really enjoyed, yeah, I really enjoyed, Gyasi's Transcendent Kingdom.
yeah.
Really enjoyed. There's this novel called Nights When Nothing Happened by Simon Han. That's like super great. There's a collection of essays called Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby that is just like really brilliant, and that's been like the gift, like my go-to gift that I've been giving to everyone. There's a short novel called Almond by Won-pyung that came out over the summer, and it's a really lovely story about friendship. And it's just, it's just really, I don't know, it's just like really thoughtful and great. There's just been like a lot of really great fiction as of late. And so in that way, like I feel like it's been a big gift for everyone.
Well, I wanted to ask you too about, you mentioned literary fiction. You're like some of the things that you don't see. Like you were like a lot of times in literary fiction, you just don't see a lot of sex. Although okay, I beg to differ on that one. But you were like you don't see a lot of sex. You don't see a lot of what else were you saying?
Work and
That
eating.
work and eating. I don't know why I fixated on the sex part. Well, because you know what I was thinking. But you do. I feel like you see a lot of sex, but it's not like the romantic sex. And then it's kind of like the mm, mm,
That's fair. Yeah.
kind of like done and that's it. And it was either horrible or awkward or kind of like I was thinking about like, my middle-aged crisis while we were having sex and then it couldn't finish.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. That's super fair. I feel like you see a lot of sex between white people specifically. Like if you like straight white people, and specifically like if there's sex like in literary fiction, it's like some white guy can figure something out about himself, like some problem that he has in his life, and by the end of it, like he's solved that problem, right? But really trying to figure out ways to write about sex and write characters having sex in which they're learning things about each other and where they're allowed to have pleasure and that have characters that are queer do that, have characters that are black do that, have characters that are Latinx, Asian American do that.
Mhm.
So really trying to allow folks to take pleasure from the sex that they're having and not having it be like explicitly like just some white man like trying to figure out how to save his marriage or like whatever over the course of this act.
Someone asked about the cover too. They wanted to know what symbolized the cover. And I know that authors don't always create the cover themselves, and you oftentimes don't. But still, it seems pretty symbolic. I saw a little Asian, little American myself, but what is the
Yeah,
cover?
I was really fortunate. Na Kim is actually the designer and the artist for the cover, and she's actually on Twitter. So like you can, I don't know what her ad is, but you can Google Na Kim. She's the first person that's gonna show up. I was really lucky that she designed the cover because like she's someone I think in our industry, like I feel like there are folks who just are really good at their jobs, and then there are other folks who like they're just like working at a level that is just like entirely separate from everyone else. And I feel like Nas is like one of those people. And I think one of my favorite things about it is that like you can look at the cover and it can mean different things to different people, and also it can mean different things at different times. Like for some folks, it's chopsticks and a plastic bag. For other folks, like the first thing that they see is a truce flag. For other folks, like the first thing that they see, yeah, the first thing that they see is like a flag that is like free of like nationalities or free of labels or free of like any like sort of determining factors. And for other folks, like the food is like immediately what jumps out to them. And that flexibility about the porousness of borders, about the importance of food, about the ways that cultures intermingle with one another, just like having that with like a really simple image that you see offhand, it feels like a big gift to have someone who read your work and took the time to come up with something that captured all of that. So like Malcolm, I think she just did the loveliest job with it.
It's iconic. Oh, it's not, and it's also, yeah. Some people in the comments are saying it's upside. So someone asked if it was upside down, but everyone else is like, yeah, no, it's not upside down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
it's the
camera.
first. It's the, you guys. It's the front camera. So, Apple usually switches it for you. Like they have a program in the camera that flip it, but Instagram doesn't do that with the camera. So anytime I'm holding up a book, it's like this cup, it's backward. So the R is backwards. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you
Oh,
for
wow.
writing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time out to chat with us and about food and relationships and your craft and just everything. And I really am super excited to see the show. I think it's incredible. I think I might have seen the news somewhere, but maybe I didn't, because when you told me, it felt like I heard it for the first time. And so that's incredible. The fact that you're writing the script for it is not common, not common at all. And that means we're going to have some really, what is it, true to, again, words, not here today. I don't, there, yeah, I'm like, we're going to have some true to life, or true to the authorial, maybe canon, right? Something close to your original vision, which we're really excited about. And thank you so much. Someone said, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Authentic.
Yeah. Thank
Thank you.
y'all. Yeah. Thank y'all. And thank y'all for watching, and everyone, please take care, stay safe. Yeah. And take care of each other. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to make some bread pudding later this week because you really,
Please do.
I'm about it.
Oh,
Thank
I'll
you.
live for you.
Congratulations on everything, the success, the warm critical reception and commercial reception as well, and the TV show and everything, and for chatting with us. And you're a 90s baby, and you're just doing it big already.
Wow. Yeah, you're very kind. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for again, being such a big advocate for books. Like, it means a
Thank
lot.
you. Y'all didn't know? Bye.
All right. Take care. Yeah.